Okay, it's an architectural meeting. Let's go through our agenda. So Carrie is first with scope for CMS pages. Let me share that.
Maybe I'm recording. We are in Game Boy.
All right, so this is for an epic we have to add scope context to CMS pages, as we currently have scope for various stores and store views for products and categories, but we don't have them for CMS pages. So that's what this is going to do.
May I ask a question? Maybe this is not a question, it's correlation. You do have scopes for CMS pages.
Yeah, and it's already in comments in the pull on the pull request, right?
Actually, we have it since Magento 1.x. What is the purpose of this story, may I ask?
So right now, when our merchants want to create localized content, they're having to duplicate pages and put in the customized language there, and then do a lot of extra overhead. So what we want to do is
products.
Yeah, well, no, for products, we have like the little scope switcher up here.
Do you have the design that Eugene did that might help
Yeah,
just
yeah.
visually illustrate what we're trying to achieve?
I mean, that's we have the same data structure for products, categories, and CMS pages. The only one difference is we have that we don't have this scope switcher for CMS pages.
Right.
So this story, for my clarification for me, the story is just to add this switcher.
Right.
Okay,
But also change the database schema because the
Why?
database schema is different.
Why, if our actual database schema supports multiple store views for CMS pages, you can specify values per each store view.
That you want to add the fallback also.
Okay, fallback mechanism, this is a little bit another question, but right now it is possible to have a multiple version of data for one page per each store view. Okay.
Right, but right now that relationship in the database is being used for this. To enable the page for different store views. It's not being used to customize content, and the product owner wants to maintain those two things separately. She wants to control the pages and websites attribute at a global level for the page, but then have content specific to store views. So it would require additional changes. This is the design. This is the current schema. Everything is in the page table, and then there's their relationship to the store, like we said. That's just used to maintain this enabled property. So their proposal is to pull all of those attributes out into a content table that's going to be indexed on the page ID and the store ID. And then that will be how we manage the content that's specific to the store view. So I guess my one question outstanding is that we have a row ID and page ID. So currently our page store table joins on the row ID. So I wasn't sure if it would be better to use a page ID or row ID.
So you have to use row ID.
Maybe let's do overview of the pull request, like discuss the goals again.
So this is just from the ticket. Stating that the pages and blocks don't support the scope like the product and categories do. Again, the merchants are having to duplicate pages for the localized content. So we're going to be adding the product widget into the page builder so that we can make content specific to store views. We'll have restrictions based on whatever the user role has access to. Will also restrict what they have access to within that context. And then, like right now, the dynamic block has that store switcher on it, but it doesn't always work. And once we add this into pages, it actually fixes the problem that we're having there. So it will add the correct store scope so that it doesn't show everything. Yep, so the objectives are just to add that scope.
So the only differences I see from what we currently have is that we will get fallback and ACL management. Everything else is the same. Like some of the points mentioned, they have like bugs on the widgets. It looks to me.
Yeah, I think that those will be fixed once we add the overall scope.
Yeah, but this can be fixed currently. So I'm just trying to, like, there's difference in functionality, assuming all of the bugs are fixed in the current implementation or in the future implementation. The differences would be that we will get fallback and different ACL management. Everything else is the same.
We're not doing anything different for ACL.
But currently it doesn't exist.
Right.
So we will get ACL.
Right, for the pages.
And we will get fallback.
Actually, I have a question. Sorry.
What do you mean by fallback?
Fallback is, so currently,
Right now, as I understand, you can have content per page only.
you can assign to all store views.
So if you need to change content, you need to create different page and assign it to different.
Right now or what?
Right now.
No, right now, in case you want to add a store-specific values, I mean localization, you have to duplicate, but this is actually this is not a new page. This is like an EAV attribute, but this is not an EAV attribute. This is data overall. So for each store view for a single page, you may have your own representation. Actually, this is working right now. You can actually, I can show you even right now with Magento starting Analytics. But my question is, okay, this is, I understand that we are going to achieve the consistent behavior with the product and get a fallback in case we have just a default value for all stores and we want to specify just some specific fields. Is this correct? Okay, so I have a question, how we are going to achieve this with this structure? Because for products and categories, we fortunately or unfortunately we have an EAV structure. So we have a clear difference between we don't have value and we have a null value. Actual schema does not have this difference. So how we will know that we have to fall back some value, for instance, content from particular store to a default? What will be the rule?
So if there's no specific store view content available, then it'll default back to the all store views.
What about if I want to have a null as a value? Because this is valid cases we have for products. When you have a default, for instance, you have a default values for your global store view, but you don't want to have these values for a particular one because this structure will not support it.
Right, so this is what you're talking about, like the use default values?
No. In case you want to overload an existing value with a null.
Do you want to have the field empty?
Yeah.
So yeah, like you have default value for title, but then you don't have any value for title in subscope, in some store, but you want to get it from the default one.
This is
but
a problem.
You want to change text.
With actual schema, you cannot distinguish a situation when you don't have a value and when you want to have an empty value.
Would you propose we move CMS pages into the EAV?
Actually, I cannot
Pain.
propose this because it's pretty backward incompatible.
Yeah,
But yes, in case we want to achieve consistent behavior, yes.
Yes, but no.
Yes, but no. Right now, I would like to get some product input how it should work because in case if this is a strict requirements, probably we have to. But this will require more communication to community. Hey guys, we will break your CMS pages in new releases, and
Which
you know,
is not a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can,
What about compatibility for this approach?
This is also incompatible right now because we have a change schema, and I believe in case we can make a trade-off regarding fallback. For instance, we do not support empty values for overloads. we probably can stay with an existing schema, just add a fallback mechanism instead of, right now we are trying to just select one row per one store view to get all actual values. But in case you want to play with the fallbacks, we can just select 2 rows, even with current schema, and in loop check if value is empty. Okay, let's override it.
So would you prefer to keep it backwards compatible, but then have it diverge against how dynamic block was implemented? So dynamic block and CMS pages would have different schemas, even though they're trying to achieve a similar thing. Because I believe, Carrie, you based this off dynamic block.
Yeah.
Not exactly. I mean, that's.
And this is we're going to do this in 2.4, I believe, anyway. So that's what the product manager wants to achieve. So just to.
Okay, this makes things simpler. Actually, in case we are going to do this with 2.4, and we really want to keep this consistent with the products and category, okay, let's do this EAB. Let's do this JSON.
You want to make everyone in community hate us with EAB?
No, I saw so many install scripts written by Vinay with EAB actually used to be to say this. So I believe that that's all of it. Actually, we can use starting 2.4. We will be able to use the JSON fields. So in case we have to specify dynamic attributes, why we cannot use JSON instead of this? One field with everything written in JSON form, which will allow us to have exactly the same logic as EIB has right now.
In the database?
Yeah, in the database.
Wow. Community will hate that.
Oh, they already
hate EAB, so they're going to hate some JSON block field even more. So is your best case scenario is we use EAB?
My
is
best.
Is that what we're trying to? Is that what you're saying?
Sorry. I talk too much. So my first concern, that's right now with current schema we cannot achieve consistent behavior, and this is first question to product organization. Are we really want to do this? In case not, okay. Second question. If we really want to do this, can we use EAB or we can use a JSON field?
So from a implementation perspective of the JSON field, that doesn't exist in Magento yet, right? So would we?
It does, because actually this, with declarative schema, it's pretty straightforward to add any type of fields. I would say it will require approximately less than 40 rows in our framework or database to enable it.
My concern would then be drastically changing to something the community didn't know.
Yeah.
So it'd be a whole brand new thing, whereas EAB is something they already understand, even if it is a little bit more complex and they don't like it as much as other things.
We can keep it EAB. I believe this is also a good idea because we have a pretty limited number of CMS pages, so I don't see any performance concerns to introduce EAB for it.
And introducing EAB would allow them to do attributes within content, which could be even better. Another feature. We'll just have to migrate everything into EAB when 2.4 installs, which is pretty easy.
Yeah.
So there was also a question about localization content in the current this current functionality. If you have multiple websites and have on each website the same languages, you can easily assign content in one language to different store views. After the change, it will become much more complicated because you will have to redefine language for each of the store view. Did we get agreement that this is okay? Because this looks to me like a degradation of the functionality, and the current approach might be actually better for CMS pages.
But we need a product owner, I believe. I don't want to answer this question without
This question is already was asked in 2 places. No answer.
Which answer?
No answer.
So
that was one question. Another question is, we in 2.3 we introduced new feature to duplicate CMS pages to make content editing easier. Do we remove this feature in 2.4? Because I don't see how it's going to work. It doesn't make sense anymore.
product
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
I can tell you what Elena might say, but we would just be best off deferring to her and looping back. But I think, whatever decision she makes on those two, the EAV thing sounds like, if everyone else agrees, that's probably the best step to go to, the best place to go to. We have a general consensus.
In case we want to achieve fallbacks for attributes, I believe, unfortunately, this is the only option we have.
And I think it unifies content with products and categories, so it's not an awful move.
Yeah, it sounds good, especially that we definitely sure that this will not affect performance.
Mm-hmm.
Unless we want to get rid of EAV attributes at some point.
We don't. We love EAV attributes with all of our hearts. The problem only with the storage approach. As soon we will be able to switch from EAV database structure to a pure JSON, this will not be a problem any more longer. And I believe we will do this. Actually, we have a proposal which is approved to introduce JSON fields with a 2.4 release, and I believe this is a first step to move dynamic structure into JSON.
So then it makes sense to start.
Yeah. So
Yeah, we can start with this.
would that be framework level? So our implementation of EAV wouldn't need to worry about that for now until you did that.
Actually, we can use EAV attributes and use a JSON as a storage.
Yeah. So somewhere like deep in the EAV attribute system, instead of going into the standard fields, it just swaps it out for JSON.
Yeah.
So we don't need to worry what the final data store is.
And with interfaces, do we just introduce new interfaces?
Why we don't need to do this? Actually, we have the exactly the same number of attributes, and I believe all these attributes are system attributes. We cannot remove them. As this is the same how we have a product name and a product description. Both of them are presented in system as EAV attributes, but this is a part of product interface which we cannot change.
We're going to get some new fields on those interfaces.
What do you mean?
Like you see, like we will here in this variant of schema, we will get storage field.
So we're saying we're going to use EAV, so Carrie probably needs to rewrite this and then repropose it. Because this is old now. If we're
So
go
this EAV, it will also require change to the interfaces.
I don't see really changes that we have to do with EAV. Actually, the only change is probably we'll have to do this. In case we don't have a custom attributes in CMS pages, we'll have to add it. But all other fields will be supported. I mean, we will not remove any fields from an existing structure.
Yeah, but we'll have to add new fields.
Custom attributes, this is minor change. This is good for a 2.4.
I didn't change anything at 2.4.
But I definitely believe we need to Elena here because this is pretty significant change, and the only reason to do this is that we will not be able to support consistent behavior with product without such change.
Yeah, so Carrie can rewrite this for EAV because that does make a lot of sense from my perspective and your perspective. So we can rewrite that, and in this next meeting we can invite Elena along, and we can
Maybe let's have just a separate meeting.
Yeah.
While we write for.
I don't know your process.
It's fine.
So we can schedule that once Carrie's rewritten, and then we can answer Igor's product questions, work out if EAV is the best solution, and then get
In
the
case
little
we
approved stamp.
really have such a requirement, I believe as soon we will
Yeah, makes
announce Elena our concerns, probably we will have new requirements.
I just know we didn't want to break everything, and EAV is kind of breaking everything, but not breaking everything. So this was a first iteration. So good discussion.
So who wants to be in the next meeting?
Probably.
Yeah, most likely, yeah.
And Andrei Konosov.
Who?
Andrei Konosov.
Okay, done with this topic, right?
Right, so that took 10 minutes, right?
Almost. Okay, next Alex.
Okay, could you please stop sharing?
Well, let me click the button. There it is.
So I'm going to talk about several, basically two issues related to GraphQL, particularly GraphQL framework. And one of the investigations or like evaluations is related to schema federation, which is evolution of schema stitching mechanism. And I want to mention that schema stitching in general is taking several independent GraphQL schemas and presenting them to client as single schema. So client can work with all different data structures and queries from different services potentially. The problem with standard schema stitching is that it does not allow extensibility, modularity, and you just get schemas from different services side by side, and you can make, let's say, single query to multiple services, but you cannot extend data types defined in one schema from another schema. In Magento, we implemented our custom version of schema stitching, which actually allows modularity and extensibility, so we can define parts of the schema in different modules, and we can extend, let's say, products interface with reviews or other fields, and eventually all this is merged into a single schema, and you just get monolithic API eventually. So what Apollo does, they introduce schema federation, which is a replacement for standard schema stitching, which I mentioned at the beginning. And I can just show a couple examples what it does. So you just get different parts of schema defined in different services, independent services. And they provide syntax for extensibility with extend type, and also for linking entities defined in different services. So you define basically like keys in a database, you define something similar here, and eventually you are able to link entities defined in different services. So they say, okay, so this is account service, you define user, then there is product service, where you define basic representation of product, and then you might have review service, which extends user with reviews and it extends products with reviews. And eventually you have to create your, they call it gateway, and initialize it with location of 3 different schemas. And this gateway will merge all the schemas, and it has 2 basic responsibilities. One is merging schemas together and presenting them to the client as if it was single monolithic application. And second is query planning. So when the client actually makes a request, let's assume the client makes this simple query, it will hit just single service. In case of more complicated query, which involves different services on the server side, the gateway will have to plan the query, how to execute it. So it will execute, let's say, the query to product service first. It will fetch all the entities. Now it knows IDs or like keys which to use to fetch related reviews, for example. And then it will execute second and third queries to second and third services. So that's basic idea of schema federation. And the goal of this proposal was to evaluate whether we want to implement it in our PHP library or like our PHP implementation, since we rely on the Bonix PHP GraphQL library, which is basically supported on the level of some bug fixes, but I haven't seen any new features added to that library in the latest couple of years. So it means that if you want to add new features, we have to implement those features ourselves. And the goal of the proposal is to evaluate whether it makes sense to implement those features now, or maybe wait for later, or not implement them at all. So if we compare it to our custom implementation of schema stitching, both schema federation and our custom schema stitching support modularity, types extensibility, and separation of concerns. Means that we can basically define different entities in different modules, and as long as you not install those modules, those entities will not be present in schema, and for the client, it all looks like monolithic application. So we have these features already covered by our custom implementation of schema stitching. What is not supported by our schema stitching is support for microservice architecture, or like multi-service deployment, as we call it, which is probably not going to happen like this year. And also this mechanism for smart query planning and resolution, smart resolution between different services. So concerns that we have is that it is not implemented in PHP, so we will have to follow this specification, or like they have open source version of this gateway, so it's possible to somehow port it to PHP, but still it will be an effort, I think. And second, we will have to refactor our schema potentially in backward incompatible manner to add definition of extensions, because they introduce custom syntax for extensions and references. There are actually a couple more directives, but they're not so important. And migration path is, as I mentioned, like we have to implement this part of the library ourselves and rewrite schemas. Resulting schema may be backward compatible, and since at the moment we treat only schema as our public API, it should be possible. I'm not sure 100% until we do some prototyping, but it should be possible to do it in backward compatible way from client perspective. And my current recommendation is not to invest into this implementation yet until we have some progress with service decomposition. And potentially there might be someone who implements this before us on framework level, and maybe we can reuse this in the future. The chance is slim, but it is still possible. Any questions?
So right now, as I understand, even if you talk about service isolation, we were going to have this gateway, API gateway, where like backend for frontend for GraphQL, and that would handle calls to different services, right? It will be on the server side of BFF. What Federation, Schema Federation is doing, it's moving the calls to the client, as I understand.
So what it is, it's basically smarter gateway which can link entities from different services, and it can it can have some smart algorithm for query resolution.
Yes, but
and
it
also
can
schema
be on the
extension.
client side, as I understand.
So the problem with our gateway is that it will not allow extensions present. So we won't be able to extend one entity from another service, because there are no mechanisms for that. And this is actually the mechanism support. And what Apollo says,
But this is not what Olga asked. So the answer to the Olga's question. So Olga's question was about whether we put all that logic about the routing to the client, and the answer is no.
No.
But
So this is
gateway?
server side implementation.
But what is gateway?
So gateway is
on the server side.
it is like GraphQL's part of GraphQL server basically.
So you can consider it as a part of our BFF.
Yes, it can be implemented on the BFF
Or
side.
it can be another application. Probably that's for
Yeah, but in fact it will play a role of the BFF.
Yes, correct.
yeah, this case here.
Okay.
So it is just something that we never discussed in BFF discussions, because when we discussed BFF, we said just proxy and queries, and this is like smart BFF.
So the main benefit is extensibility between services.
Yes, and also one of cool features is that, let's say if you have this reviews service, it can operate independently. If you just somehow have data for reviews, it can operate independently, and it can provide even ID of the products, but you will not be able to resolve more data. And this is something that is not supported now in our monolithic approach, because you obviously have to have the main type to be able to extend it and then resolve the extension. And in their case, if you have multiple services running independently, and if you have one service running but the others are down, you're still able to resolve data provided by that service because it is still fully functional and fully a compliant GraphQL schema. Okay, so if no concerns with this, postponing this until later.
Do we merge it? Like everybody we need it, or we any concerns?
Somebody need to approve it formally.
Okay, I will do.
Yeah, and there is also discussion with Vinay. I believe Vinay is also on board with this in the comments. So the second one is evaluation of subscriptions. In the past, we created some stories to implement subscriptions for GraphQL, but nobody actually evaluated whether we need them and how difficult it would be and does it make sense. So again, this is evaluation to better understand whether it makes sense. So what subscriptions are is it's like real-time event-based like pops-up implementation for GraphQL where the client subscribes for a specific event on the server and it can receive notifications via GraphQL about some events. And the typical implementation for subscriptions is using WebSockets, using WebSockets as communication protocol. And there are a couple concerns with WebSockets implementation in Magento for subscriptions. Like one of them is that WebSockets are not natively supported by PHP, and you have to use third-party libraries. However, libraries exist. And second is justification from the use case perspective. So the most basic use cases which I can think of are on the client side, on the storefront, stock and cart updates, real-time updates for the client. And on the admin panel side is analytics, admin notification, order management, inventory updates. So on the admin side, there are probably more use cases for that. However, we are not going to support GraphQL coverage for admin, at least for now. And considering complications with implementation of WebSocket support and extra resources required from web server in this case, because you will have to have persistent connections with clients in this case, and it will definitely require more resources. So the suggestion is that probably it doesn't make sense in general. On the platform level, somebody may implement it if they wish. However, it doesn't make sense for us. And additionally, subscriptions are also not supported by Webonics library again. So if you want to support them, you have to implement it on the framework level ourselves. Yeah, so basically that's it.
Okay.
So probably that's all from my side. If no other questions, and if somebody can do formal review or ask some questions in the comments, would be nice.
Okay. David?
I had a quick question about one of our static tests that's doing an assert on the PHP versions in our composer.json in the root and in our modules. We seem to have a requirement in the code, which I just wanted to understand a little bit, that if I'm not sharing anything because it's a really short question. If the module is a Magento vended module, we require the PHP version in the root and the module to be equal, but we don't. But whereas if the module is not a Magento vended module, we only require that the module supports all of the versions that the root composer.json says it supports. So some backstory, we just did the 7.3 work for Page Builder, but the tech division PR wasn't merged beforehand. So Page Builder now supports 7.1 through to 7.3, but 2.3 develop only supports 7.1 and 7.2. So we provide more support and we have full overlap of the core versions. So I just wanted to understand, is this test broken or is there a reason why we want these versions to be equal?
So I think the original implementation was that the versions should be equal. Then extensions came and they, like, common scenario is that they implement extensions for multiple Magento versions. That's why I think we extended that. I don't see why we would limit.
Yeah, I asked Peter and I asked Christian, and it seems pretty safe that if Page Builder supports all the core versions plus more, that's fine. Composer will resolve that for you anyway. So if someone tries to use 2.3 on 7.3 now, it won't work anyway until that's merged. So I was basically requesting, should we change this test to use the same logic for all modules? So as long as they support all of the root versions, we're fine with saying that's a pass on the static test.
I think it's fine.
Any objections?
Makes sense.
Cool.
What about, by the way, Git history? Did you get anything from it?
I annotated it, and
So I would assume that the first thing was added, like equation was added before,
Yeah.
right? And that.
I just feel like someone might have been a bit lazy, but I don't really know. It was the last change was for Magento kind of be installed like composer packages, but I can dig into the history to see when this actual code was modified and added. But yeah, if no one has any objections, unless I find anything significant, I'll go ahead and fix the test.
Sounds good.
Cool.
That's the last topic. Anything else you wanted to discuss? If not, then we're done for today.
Sure.
So.